A letter is a patient thing. It does not age the way memory does. It does not soften at the edges or rearrange itself in the night the way guilt does. It sits exactly where it was placed, holding exactly what was put inside it, waiting with the indifference of paper and ink for someone to finally open it. It does not know how many years have passed. It does not know what it will do to the people who read it. The envelope that Margaret Dean found in her father's study in April of 2023 was sealed with wax. Old wax, brown and slightly cracked at the edge. On the front, in her father's handwriting, careful, deliberate, the handwriting of a man who had been a bookkeeper for 30 years and trusted precision in all things, were 12 words. For the Lynchburg Police Department. To be opened only after my death. Arthur Dean had been dead for 11 days. His daughter held the envelope for a long time before she put it in her car and drove to the police station. She said later that she already knew, in the way you know things when you find a sealed letter in a locked box in a dead man's study, that whatever was inside had been waiting there a very long time, that something had been wrong in her family, in a way she had felt but never been able to name. She was right on both counts. Sandra Pruitt was 26 years old in the autumn of 1981. She had grown up in Campbell County, just outside Lynchburg, Virginia, the middle child of a tobacco farmer named Earl and his wife Dorothy. She had worked hard to get out of the county in the way that certain children of that part of Virginia worked hard to get out. Not because they were ashamed of where they came from, but because they could see a larger life waiting if they were willing to reach for it. She had attended Longwood College, studied public administration, and taken a position as a records clerk at the Campbell County Courthouse, where she had worked for 3 years and been promoted twice. She was engaged to be married. His name was Richard Howell, a soft-spoken man who drove a delivery route and played guitar on Sunday evenings, and had proposed to Sandra on the back porch of his mother's house in the spring of 1981 with a ring he had saved for 8 months to buy. They were going to be married the following June. Sandra had the venue. She had the dress. She had sent invitations to 64 people. On the evening of October 23, 1981, Sandra left the courthouse after a late shift and did not arrive home. She had called Richard from the office phone at approximately 6:15 to say she was leaving. He began calling her apartment at 7:30 when she hadn't arrived. By 9:00, he was driving the route between the courthouse and her apartment, looking for her car. He found nothing. He called the police at 9:40. Sandra Pruitt's body was found 2 days later in a drainage ditch off a rural road near Concord, approximately 12 miles from the courthouse. She had been strangled. Her car was found abandoned on a service road a quarter-mile away, doors unlocked, her purse on the passenger seat. Richard Howell, when told, sat down on the floor of his kitchen and did not get up for a long time. He would later say that he did not get up all the way for years. The investigation moved with the specific energy of a small jurisdiction confronting the worst thing it had seen in recent memory. The Campbell County Sheriff's Department, assisted by the Virginia State Police, worked the case intensively through the winter of 1981 and into 1982. Witnesses were interviewed. Sandra's movements on the evening of October 23rd were painstakingly reconstructed. A handful of people had seen her car in the courthouse parking lot as late as 6:00. No one had seen it after that. A person of interest emerged within the first month. His name was Gerald Maurer. He was 32 years old, a senior administrator at the courthouse, Sandra's direct supervisor, and a man about whom 2 of her co-workers had independently told investigators that Sandra had complained, not formally, not in any documented way, but in the conversational manner of women who are trying to manage a situation they have not yet decided is serious enough to escalate. Gerald Maurer had been too attentive. He had made comments. He had found reasons to come to her desk. Sandra had found it uncomfortable and had said so to people she trusted. Investigators brought Maurer in within the first 2 weeks. He was composed. He denied any involvement. He provided an alibi for the evening of October 23rd. He had been at the home of his longtime friend, a man named Arthur Dean, from approximately 5:30 in the evening until well past 10:00. They had watched the game, he said. They had had dinner. Arthur's wife had been there. It had been an ordinary evening. Arthur Dean confirmed every detail. His wife confirmed every detail. The alibi was consistent, corroborated, and held up against every angle investigators could find to push on it. They pushed hard. They had nothing to push it over with. Without physical evidence directly linking Maurer to Sandra or to the location where her body was found, and without the forensic techniques in 1981 that would have made such a connection possible even if the evidence existed, the investigation stalled. The case remained open, technically, for the next 4 decades. In practice, it became one of those files that gets reviewed when a new investigator rotates in, noted, and set aside. The leads had been exhausted. The suspect had held an alibi. Sandra Pruitt was a name in a cabinet and a photograph on a wall in the Lynchburg office of a victim advocacy organization that had been founded, in part because of her. Richard Howell never married. He still lived in Campbell County. He had called the sheriff's department every few years to ask if anything had changed. The answer was always no. He had learned to live inside that answer without being destroyed by it, which is a thing some people manage and some people don't. And the line between those outcomes is not always character or strength. Sometimes it is just luck and the presence of people who stay close. He had stayed close to Sandra's younger sister, Paulette, who had been 19 when Sandra was killed. Paulette Pruitt was the person who had kept the case visible, the one who gave newspaper interviews on the anniversary, who had lobbied the Virginia State Police for a formal cold case review, who had submitted the family's DNA to NAMOS in 2009 so that if anything was ever recovered or compared, the reference was already there. She was 61 years old in the spring of 2023, and she had been doing this for 42 years. She was the first person the Lynchburg Police Department called after Margaret Dean walked in with the envelope. Arthur Dean's letter was 9 handwritten pages. Investigators have not released the letter in full, and the family has not made it public. But the substance of its contents was established through the proceedings that followed and through a statement released by the Campbell County Commonwealth's Attorney's Office. Arthur Dean had lied. Gerald Maurer had not been at his house on the evening of October 23, 1981. Gerald Maurer had called Arthur at approximately 7:15 that evening from a payphone, in a state that Arthur described in his letter as the most frightened he had ever heard another person sound. He had not told Arthur what had happened on that call. He had told him only that he needed Arthur to say he had been with him all evening, and that if Arthur did not say this, he would go to prison, and Arthur's own life would be destroyed alongside his. The destruction Arthur feared was specific. In the letter, he described an episode from 1979 in which he had made a significant error in the financial records of a business partnership he and Gerald had briefly maintained. An error that had crossed, Arthur wrote, into territory he was not proud of. Gerald had known. Gerald had held it quietly, the way certain people hold certain things, keeping them available for the moment they become useful. That moment came on a Tuesday evening in October of 1981. Arthur Dean had provided the alibi. His wife, he wrote, had confirmed it at his instruction, telling her only that Gerald was in some kind of trouble and that the family needed to help. He did not tell her what kind of trouble. She died in 2014, he noted in the letter, without ever knowing the full truth of what she had confirmed in that police interview. He wrote that this was one of the things he was most ashamed of, that she had been an honest woman, and he had made her a part of something dishonest without her knowledge or consent. The letter described the 42 years that followed in terms that investigators found remarkable for their clarity and absence of self-justification. Arthur Dean did not claim that he had not understood what he was doing. He did not argue that Gerald had coerced him beyond what he was capable of resisting. He wrote that he had been afraid, and that he had made a choice, and that he had known every day since that choice exactly what it had cost Sandra Pruitt and the people who loved her. He wrote that he had thought about Richard Howell specifically, a man he had never met, more times than he could count. He wrote that he had started and abandoned this letter 4 times over the course of 20 years before finally completing it in the winter of 2022. He wrote that he was a coward. He did not ask to be forgiven. He asked only that the letter be delivered. In 9 pages, Arthur Dean had done what 42 years of active investigation had not been able to do. He had opened the case back up. The Lynchburg Police Department, working with the Virginia State Police Cold Case Unit and the Campbell County Commonwealth's attorney, moved carefully in the weeks following the letter's discovery. A confession letter from a dead man is not by itself sufficient for an arrest. It is a beginning, a credible, detailed, corroborated by its specificity beginning, but a beginning nonetheless. Investigators needed to build a case that could survive a courtroom. They needed physical evidence. What they had from 1981 was limited, but not nothing. Hair samples recovered from Sandra Pruitt's clothing during the original investigation had been stored in the State Crime Lab in Richmond. They had been analyzed in 1981 using the microscopic comparison methods of that era, which could speak to general characteristics, but not to individual identity. In 2023, those same samples were submitted for mitochondrial DNA extraction, a technique that can retrieve genetic information from hair samples even after significant degradation. The process took 11 weeks. The DNA was compared to a reference sample obtained from Gerald Maurer through a lawful collection order. Maurer, by this point, had been placed under quiet surveillance since shortly after the letter was received. He was 74 years old. He had retired from public administration in 2009, had lived in Roanoke since 2015, and had, by all external appearances, spent the 42 years since Sandra Pruitt's death as an ordinary man with an ordinary life. He had a daughter. He had attended his grandchildren's school events. He had been, to everyone who knew him in his retirement, unremarkable. The mitochondrial DNA from the hair samples was consistent with Gerald Maurer's profile. Combined with the letter, the original investigative record, and new witness interviews conducted by the Cold Case Unit, the Commonwealth's attorney authorized an arrest warrant. Gerald Maurer was taken into custody at his home in Roanoke on a Wednesday morning in September of 2023. He said nothing when the officers identified themselves. He looked at the arrest warrant for a long time. His daughter, who was present, asked what was happening. One of the investigators told her that her father was being arrested for the 1981 murder of Sandra Pruitt. Maurer looked at his daughter when they said the name. He did not look at the investigators again. He was charged with first-degree murder. He pled not guilty. His trial began in the spring of 2024 and lasted 8 days. The prosecution built its case around the letter, the DNA, and the reconstructed evidence of Maurer's conduct in the weeks before Sandra's death. The co-workers who described his behavior, a calendar entry from Sandra's own appointment book that had been in the file since 1981, noting a meeting with Maurer on the afternoon of October 23rd, that had not, at the time of the original investigation, been placed in full context. The defense challenged the reliability of 40-year-old hair samples and argued that the letter of a dead man, unable to be cross-examined, was inherently suspect. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Gerald Maurer was convicted of first-degree murder. He was sentenced to life in prison. He is 74 years old. He will not leave. Paulette Pruitt was in the courtroom for the verdict. She had been in the courtroom for every day of every session. She has said in interviews that she could not have told you, in the years before 2023, whether she would live to see this. That she had tried to make peace with the possibility that she would not. She had decided, each time she considered stopping, to continue. Not because she believed it would change anything, but because continuing was the only thing that felt honest. Richard Howell, now in his late 70s, drove to the courthouse on the day the verdict was read. He sat in the gallery. He has not spoken to journalists. He has not released a statement. He was there, which is its own statement. And he has been allowed to keep what it meant to himself. Margaret Dean, Arthur's daughter, was not in the courtroom. She has spoken briefly about what the year since she found the envelope has been like. The weight of knowing that her father, whom she loved, had carried something this heavy for so many decades. The anger at what he had withheld, and the complicated gratitude for what he finally delivered. She said that she did not know how to hold both of those feelings at once, and that she had stopped trying to reconcile them, and was simply letting them exist alongside each other, the way some things have to. Arthur Dean's wife, the woman who had confirmed the false alibi without knowing what she was confirming, went to her grave in 2014, not knowing. That is one of the costs the letter cannot reach. There are others. The 42 years themselves are a cost. The dress that was never worn. The June wedding that never happened. The 64 people who received an invitation in the spring of 1981 and eventually understood it would not be honored. A sealed letter and 11 weeks of DNA extraction, and a jury of 12 people in a Virginia courtroom cannot give any of that back. What they can do, what they did, is put a name to what happened and attach it, permanently and officially, to the man responsible. Think about what it takes to write 9 pages of confession and seal them in an envelope and lock them in a box and leave them for someone to find after you are gone. The courage in that, such as it is real. And the cowardice that made those 9 pages necessary. The choice made on a Tuesday evening in 1981 to say yes when the phone rang and a frightened man asked him to lie, that is also real and larger, and it swallowed 42 years whole. Arthur Dean did the right thing. He also did the wrong thing for 4 decades first, and a woman's sister grew old waiting, and a man who loved her never built the life he had planned, and Sandra Pruitt got 42 fewer years of justice than she deserved. Both of those things are true. They will continue to be true. The letter does not resolve the tension between them. It simply hands it to the rest of us to hold. Sandra Pruitt was 26 years old. She had worked hard for the life she was building. She had a dress, she had a venue, she had a ring on her finger, and 64 people who were going to come and watch her begin something new. She deserved the chance to begin it. Remember her name, not the letter, not the trial, not the 42 years. Her, Sandra Pruitt.